They said his time was over. The heavy iron doors clanged shut behind him as the prison guards led him down a corridor most men never returned from. The smell of rust, damp walls, and sweat carried the weight of countless souls who had walked that same path. Yet his eyes weren't on the floor, nor were they on the rope that waited. They were searching for something else. Something pure. Something that had loved him when the world refused to. His name was Marcus Hayes, a young black man born in the rough edges of a southern town where skin color decided worth. His story was not of a hardened criminal, but of a man broken by a system that had been stacked against him since birth. He grew up watching his mother scrub floors until her hands cracked open, just to keep the lights on. His father never there. His classroom teachers saw him as a troublemaker before they ever saw him as a child. By 16, the police knew his name, though Marcus had never committed more than the crime of being young, poor and black in a place where that was enough to be guilty. One night changed everything. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. A convenience store robbery. A shot fired. A life lost. Marcus wasn't the man holding the gun, but the color of his skin was all the jury needed. They called him a killer. The prosecutor painted him as dangerous, uneducated, and violent. And the public believed it, because believing it was easier than seeing the truth. He was sentenced to die, but through the endless nights on a concrete bed, one thing gave him strength. A dog, a brown-eyed mutt named Liberty, that he had rescued from the street years before his arrest. Liberty had been abandoned, ribs showing, tail between her legs, afraid of every hand that reached for her. Marcus had fed her, sheltered her, given her trust when the world gave her none. She became his family, his anchor, the only living soul who had looked at him without judgment. And now, as the clock ticked toward his final breath, his last request was not for a priest, not for a final meal, not even to speak his truth to the governor who ignored his pleas. He asked for liberty, one last moment to press his forehead against hers, one last chance to look into the only eyes that had ever truly seen him. The guards laughed at first. A dog? Boy, you out of your mind. But something in Marcus's tone made even hardened men pause. It wasn't a plea of weakness, it was the dignity of a man who had lost everything but love. And so, against all odds, the warden allowed it. The night before the execution, Liberty was brought into the prison yard under a fading orange sky. When Marcus saw her, his knees buckled. The dog broke free of the leash and leapt into his arms, tail wagging, tongue desperate to cover every inch of his face. She hadn't forgotten. Not a single day, and for the first time in years, Marcus laughed, a deep, broken laugh that turned into sobs against the fur of the animal he loved. The guards looked away. Some swallowed hard, because in that moment, Marcus was not an inmate, not a number, not the label they had stamped on him. He was simply a man who had loved and been loved back. But then something unexpected happened. As Liberty pressed herself against his chest, she began to whine, pawing at him, nudging his hand again and again. Marcus noticed her fur was rougher, her ribs sharper. She wasn't well. He whispered, "What's wrong, girl?" And Liberty, in her own way, seemed to answer, not with words but with urgency, as if she was carrying a message too heavy for silence. The prison chaplain, standing near, tilted his head. "Dogs don't lie," he said softly. "They feel what we can't see." Marcus felt a chill. Liberty's eyes weren't just pleading, they were warning. And in that instant, something shifted inside him. He wasn't afraid of dying anymore. He was afraid of leaving her behind, alone, vulnerable, without the one person who had ever protected her. The night deepened, and as the guards tried to separate them, Liberty howled. The sound echoed through the prison walls, cutting through steel and stone like a blade. It was no ordinary howl. It was grief, raw and untamed, the sound of a bond so deep it defied death itself. The guards hesitated, some trembling, because that cry did what no lawyer, no preacher, no protest had managed to do. It made Marcus human in their eyes. Not an inmate, not a killer, human. The warden himself approached, his face pale. He had overseen dozens of executions, but he had never seen anything like this. He watched the man slated to die hold his dog as though holding his very soul, and something inside him cracked. He whispered, "Give them more time." And so Marcus and Liberty sat in that prison yard long past visiting hours, long past the rules. The stars wheeled overhead as he spoke to her in a voice choked with tears. He told her she was brave, that she was strong, that she had saved him more times than she would ever know. He pressed his lips to her fur and said, "If I can't walk out of here, you walk for both of us." But Liberty didn't move. She stayed. And what happened next would change everything, forever. The night grew colder, but Marcus didn't notice. He sat on the hard bench in the yard. Liberty pressed against him like a heartbeat he never wanted to let go of. Every minute that passed felt stolen from death itself, but still, time was moving. The guards shifted uneasily, their boots scraping against the concrete, as if even they didn't want to interrupt this fragile moment. Marcus whispered into Liberty's ear, "You know me better than anyone. Better than the judge, the jury, even the preacher. You know I ain't no monster." His voice cracked, but Liberty only licked his hand, her tail thumping faintly as if to say, "I know. I always knew." The chaplain stayed silent, his eyes wet with something between sorrow and revelation. The warden, standing in the shadows, clenched his fists. He was a man who believed in the law, believed in the punishment fitting the crime. But as he looked at Marcus, he saw not a murderer, but a man shackled by a history far older than him, a history of chains, of trials never fair, of men condemned not by deeds but by color. The rope waiting in the chamber was more than an execution. It was another chapter in a book written long before Marcus was born. Still, morning would come, and with it the noose. When the guards finally tried to separate them, Liberty resisted with a force none expected. She twisted, barked, and sank her paws into Marcus's jumpsuit as if she could hold him to the earth. Marcus felt his chest tighten. It wasn't just that Liberty didn't want to leave. It was that she knew. Dogs always know. They smell endings before they happen, and Liberty smelled his. As she was pulled back, Marcus rose to his feet, trembling, his voice rising with a fire none had heard from him before. "Don't you take her from me. You done took everything, my freedom, my life, my name. But this right here?" He pounded his chest where Liberty had rested her head. "This is all I got left. You ain't taking this too." The yard went silent. Even the cicadas outside the prison walls seemed to hush. The warden's jaw tightened. For the first time in decades of power, he felt the weight of his decisions pressing against his conscience. He gave a single nod. Liberty stayed. That night, Marcus wasn't placed back in his cell. They let him remain in the yard under the open stars, Liberty curled at his side. It was mercy, but it was also something more. It was a crack in the wall of indifference that had caged him his whole life. He stroked Liberty's fur as he spoke softly. "They think they gon' end me tomorrow, girl. But they wrong. I'm already free. You gave me that." He smiled faintly, tears streaking his cheeks. "Every time I thought I was gonna lose myself, you reminded me I was still human. You reminded me I was still worth something. You my freedom." The night passed slowly, every second thick with the weight of goodbye. Morning came. The air was heavy, the kind of heavy that wraps itself around your chest and squeezes, until you can't breathe. The guards moved like shadows, silent, avoiding Marcus's eyes. The chaplain clutched his Bible tighter. Though even he knew no scripture could explain the injustice about to unfold. They led Marcus toward the execution chamber. Liberty barked and lunged against the leash, a desperate sound that shook the walls. The guards tried to restrain her, but Marcus turned back one last time, his eyes locked on hers. "Stay strong, Liberty. Don't let nobody break you. You hear me?" She howled, the kind of howl that carved itself into the bones of every man who heard it. Inside the chamber, the air was suffocating. The rope hung above like a serpent waiting to strike. Marcus's legs trembled, but not from fear. He had made peace with dying. What he couldn't make peace with was leaving Liberty behind in a world that had already stolen too much from both of them. The warden stood there, his face unreadable. He had watched countless men die, but this time something gnawed at him. That dog's howl, it wasn't just grief. It was truth. It was the sound of injustice laid bare for all to hear. As Marcus was placed beneath the noose, he closed his eyes. He thought of his mother's worn hands, of the streets that had swallowed his youth, of Liberty's soft fur against his cheek. He whispered, "Lord, if you hear me, don't let her suffer. Take me, but spare her." The lever was ready. The silence was deafening, and then a voice, sharp, unwavering. "Stop." The room froze. The warden's command echoed against the stone walls. Every eye turned toward him, stunned. His hands shook as he stepped forward. "This man, he may be guilty in your records, but I don't believe he's guilty in the eyes of God, and I'll be damned if I let this rope make liars of us all." Gasps filled the chamber. The executioner's hand faltered. The chaplain dropped to his knees in silent prayer. Marcus opened his eyes, disbelief washing over him. The warden's face was pale, but his voice grew stronger. "I've overseen too many deaths to count. But last night I saw something that stripped me of my certainty. That dog, that bond, that love, It was pure. And if a man condemned as a killer can inspire that kind of loyalty, maybe the real crime is ours. Chaos erupted. Some guards protested. Others stood silent, torn between duty and conscience. The warden raised his hand. As long as I draw breath, this execution will not happen today. Marcus's knees buckled. Not from weakness, but from the overwhelming weight of hope he thought had died long ago. Liberty's barks echoed outside, frantic and insistent, as if she knew the tide had turned. The state demanded blood, but in that chamber, for the first time, mercy spoke louder than the law. And what happened next would ripple far beyond those walls, shaking a system built on centuries of silence. The room was in uproar. The execution had been halted not by the governor, not by an attorney's last-minute call, but by the very man who had been trusted to carry out the sentence. The warden's voice still echoed through the chamber, like a thunderclap. This execution will not happen today. Marcus stood trembling beneath the noose, the rope brushing against his neck. He didn't dare breathe too deep, afraid the moment might shatter like glass. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking on the warden. Why? He whispered, his voice breaking after years of holding everything inside. Why now? The warden's eyes glistened, his composure cracking for the first time in decades. Because I saw the truth, son. You may not have been born free, and you may not die free, but I will not let them erase your humanity before my eyes. Not when that dog already proved it. Outside the chamber, Liberty barked frantically, straining at her leash until the guards finally let go. She bounded into the room, her nails clattering on the tile floor, and launched herself at Marcus. Shackles clanked as he caught her in his arms. She pressed her head against his chest and let out a low whimper. As if confirming the miracle, he was still here. The chaplain stepped forward, his voice trembling. This is providence. The Lord has spoken through the innocent, but not everyone agreed. A state official who had been sent to witness the execution rose sharply, his face red with fury. This is an outrage! The sentence was final. The governor signed it. You cannot just stop. The warden cut him off. I can, and I have. If you think otherwise, drag me into court. But I will not be part of killing. A man when every fiber in me knows something is wrong. Marcus clutched Liberty tighter, tears streaming freely now. He had prepared to die, had accepted that the world would never believe in his innocence. But in this strange, impossible moment, hope pierced the darkness. Word spread quickly. Reporters swarmed outside the prison gates, demanding answers. Protesters who had long claimed Marcus was wrongfully convicted raised their voices louder than ever. The sound of Liberty's howl, captured by a guard's phone, went viral, shared across the country, a cry that cut through indifference and awakened hearts. People didn't just see a condemned man anymore. They saw the love of a dog that refused to let him go, and it made them question everything. In the days that followed, Marcus's case was reopened. For years, activists had begged for a review, but it was the sight of a dog's devotion that finally forced the system to look again. Witnesses who had been ignored were called back. Evidence that had been buried in dust was unearthed, and piece by piece the truth emerged. Marcus had not pulled the trigger. He had been there. Yes, an 18-year-old boy caught in the wrong crowd, but he had not taken a life. The real killer had cut a deal, walking free while Marcus's life was bartered away. The revelation shook the town, the state, the country. How many others, people asked, had been silenced beneath the weight of a system built not for justice but for conviction? How many had died without a liberty to howl for them? Months later, the verdict came. Marcus Hayes was exonerated. The court, with reluctant words and stiff lips, admitted what Liberty had known all along. He was innocent. When Marcus walked out of those prison gates, Liberty at his side, the crowd erupted. Some wept openly, some raised their fists, and some fell silent, ashamed at how quickly they had once believed the lies told about him. Marcus didn't smile, not at first. Freedom was heavy when you'd been denied it for so long. But as the sun warmed his face for the first time without bars between them, he knelt beside Liberty, cupped her face in his hands, and whispered, "We made it, girl. You saved me." She wagged her tail, pressing her head into his palm, and for Marcus, that was enough. But the story didn't end there. Marcus dedicated his life to fighting for others who had been silenced like him. He traveled city to city, prison to prison, telling his story not as a tragedy but as a testimony. He spoke of liberty, of the night her howl shook the walls of injustice, of how love, simple, unfiltered love, had done what lawyers and courts could not. His words burned into hearts, awakening a new movement. And liberty? She never left his side. In every speech, every march, every quiet night when Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling, haunted by years lost, she was there, a living reminder that he had been worth saving. Years later, when Liberty grew old, her muzzle gray and her steps slower, Marcus carried her in his arms the way she had once carried him through despair. And when her time came, she left this world wrapped in the arms of the man she had saved, her eyes closing with peace. At her burial, Marcus spoke softly to the small crowd gathered. They called me a killer. They called me a number. They called me guilty, but she called me family. She never doubted me, not once. And because of her, I stand here today. Because of her, I live. The silence that followed was deep, reverent. The kind of silence that carries more weight than words. Marcus's story became legend, not because it was rare, but because it was real. A reminder that behind every statistic, every headline, every cell, there is a human being. And sometimes it takes the pure heart of an animal to make us see what we should have seen all along. And though the system had nearly taken everything, it could not take his dignity. It could not take the truth. And it could not take the bond between a man and his dog, a bond strong enough to change the world. So when people spoke of Marcus Hayes in years to come, they did not remember him as the man who nearly died by a rope. They remembered him as the man who lived because love refused to let him go. They remembered Liberty's howl. And somewhere in the quiet corners of history, that sound still echoes, reminding us that justice delayed is not always justice denied, and that sometimes the most powerful voice comes from the one who cannot speak at all.